Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much to all of you for joining us this morning at today's Open Davos Forum titled The War Against Obesity. I thought where we'd start is noting that the theme for this year's economic forum is resilient growth. So as societies, we're so used to measuring progress through growth. In other words, things getting bigger in terms of our socio-economy. But when do things get too big? And certainly in terms of body mass, we have a situation now where things are getting too big, too fast. The OECD in recent data estimated there's some 500 million people, about 1 in 10 of the world's population was obese. Calling it a war on obesity is pretty strong language, but I think that language is warranted given the scale of the issue, the healthcare implications, the societal implications. So that's the topic we're going to discuss today. There's three main parts of our discussion. We're going to look at the causes of obesity. How did it get to where it is now? We're going to look at the barriers. Why is this such a complex issue to tackle? Why has it been so difficult to come to solutions? And then finally, we're going to brainstorm and we're going to look at some of the solutions from government, from industry, and from the community. So we've got a fabulous panel with us today, a really diverse panel. Let me just quickly introduce them. Over here on my right, we have Paul Bulcke, who's the Chief Executive of Nestlé. To his left, we have Linda Fried, who is the Dean and DeLamar Professor of Public Health from the Mailman School of Public Health, Columbia University. Welcome, Linda. Just to my right, we have Lisa McCallum-Carter, who's the Managing Director of Design to Move and Vice President Access to Sport from Nike. Welcome. To my left is Alison Martin, who is a member of the Group Management Board and Head of Life and Health from Swiss Re. Welcome, Alison. And last but not least, we have Mark von Ammeringen, who's the Executive Director of GAIN, which stands for the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition. Welcome, Mark. So just in terms of housekeeping and process, we're going to have a panel discussion first for about 40 minutes. We're going to try to make that as interactive amongst the panel as possible. And then after that, we're going to open it to you guys, to give you guys a chance to ask questions and to join into the debate. So let's get started. Maybe if we can kick off, and I can ask Linda a question, a scene-setting question. How did we get here? How did we, what is the scale of the problem, and how did we get so fat so fast today?
So it's really remarkable if you think about it, that, as well as a little scary, that in 30 years, the proportion, the percent of the world's population that is overweight or obese has doubled in 30 years. And just by the speed of it, we have to think about why. And there's no evidence that there's been a collective global loss of willpower. That's not the issue. When things happen that fast, though, you have to think about changing conditions. And in fact, so many things have changed simultaneously in our world and in our countries and in our cities and in our living conditions at the same time. And they have, in fact, happened over the last half century, and it's started to catch up with us. One way to think about overweight and obesity in the face of these changes, which I'm sure this whole group will talk about, is that it's a normal physiologic response to abnormal inputs. So when your body is not, for example, as active as we were built to be, because people are living in cities, because it may be hard working 2 jobs to be physically active, because our environments don't permit it, because either there aren't sidewalks, or there aren't parks, or they're not safe, or the air is too polluted, or the food we eat has changed, or the balance between those have changed, then if the changes are adverse and our body can't compensate, we gain weight. So that's one level of explanation of the imbalance between perhaps energy intake and energy output, and how the circumstances of our lives have changed so much that we have not, they've changed to the point that we're out of balance as a population.
Is it as simple as that? I mean, is it, from a medical perspective, is it a case of simple thermodynamics? So obesity is just a matter, it's an equation of calories in versus... I mean, I have friends who say, I just think about food and I get fat.
Uh-huh.
Is that true? Is that rubbish? Or is it really calories in and calories out?
There may be some dimensions to that. But at a very physiologic level, the balance could be thought about that way, but the factors that are driving it are what's so complicated. Because many of them actually are not within the willpower of the individual to control. And that's where we really hit a lot of complexity, which I think this group is well prepared to handle. There is some very interesting, perhaps quite scary, early research data that suggests that some of the environmental pollutants that we inhale, for example, or are exposed to, actually have the potential to change our own physiology in ways that make us more predisposed to gain weight. So our internal physiologic milieu, if you will, could also be slightly modified, at least in some people, in some regions. So there are many potential modifiers internally, but the huge modifiers that affect this balance are external.
Right. So you've touched on, I guess, the individual choices, and as Lisa, you're from Nike, right? So, you know, just do it. Just. Right. So, what's your view on this particular, you know, the physical activity aspect, and is it that hard to ensure that the calories out is greater than the calories in?
Well, certainly the Just Do It piece speaks directly to how important it is to inspire people to move, but we do have a lot of work to do on the supply side of this, without question. So we are, I think, to Linda's point, relying significantly and heavily on individual willpower to resolve these issues when we have set up everything around individuals today to work against them as it relates to this issue. So if you think about physical activity or inactivity as one of those really core drivers, and just to maybe extend on what Linda was talking about, we know that the magnitude of the problem is much bigger as it relates to inactivity than currently we're preconceiving it to be. We have an inactivity crisis. It has happened as we've modernised. As we modernised, we radically changed the way that we live, the way that we work, and the way that we get from point A to point B. You know, to Linda's point, designing cities around freeways, sidewalks being the exception, not the expectation, and all of that adds up to a tremendous amount of movement lost in any given day, a huge amount of incidental movement that's lost that's never actually been adequately replaced. And if you take a look at, there's some new data that's been released in the last 6 or 7 months that have put this into context. So Americans, as compared to about 1967, compared to today, are 32% less active. That's just shy of 2 generations, and by 2030 they're expected to be almost 50% less active. If you move over to China, with that economy and how quickly it's developed and how all of these behaviours have even more so entered their lives in the way that they've set up life there and radically changed you know, China as a result, the Chinese in just half of a generation are 45% less active. Now, I think, again, to Linda's point, this is way too abrupt of a change in the context of human evolution not to expect very significant costs and consequences to emerge as a result. And obesity is one of the most prevalent and obvious, but the consequences go far beyond this, and I think we know that this issue is bankrupting economies now and shortchanging futures in a very dramatic way.
You mentioned China. I guess you can't really regard China as a developing country now, given that it's the second largest economy in the world, although that simplifies things. The most obese countries I recently saw a list of them, the top 5. They say the top 5 goes like this. It's number 5, Australia, where I grew up, which is interesting given Australians love sport. Number 4 is Chile. Number 3 is New Zealand. Number 2 is Mexico. Number 1 is the USA. Now, what I found fascinating about this is the mix of developing countries and developed countries. Mark, I want to throw to you now. Developing country, developed country. It seems in developing countries we went from a situation of nutritional deficiency where people didn't have enough to eat, malnutrition in the most extreme cases, to a case where now there's nutritional surplus, people are getting obese. Can you talk a little bit about that dynamic from a food perspective?
Yeah. Well, I think it's sort of one of the things that the nutrition community is still trying to understand, because I think in theory you should go, from having undernutrition to stabilizing and then starting to see more overweight and excess. But in fact, what we see in most of the developing world, and particularly in emerging countries, is you have both happening at the same time. And so, for those who work in this sector, one of the challenges in a household in South Africa, you'll have, an obese woman, a stunted child, and they're all micronutrient deficient. So, you have there's no transition taking place in many places. And so it's very complicated to actually try and, see how this will play out. And I think one of the things we are learning is that you can't no longer see undernutrition and overweight obesity as separate. I mean, as in the nutrition sector, there's been a big focus on the first 1,000 days around undernutrition, and now we're seeing that, poor maternal nutrition and poor nutrition when the child's in the womb and in the early years actually leads to overweight and obesity and non-communicable diseases later in life. So these things now come together. The interventions to deal with undernutrition are become the same ones to deal with overnutrition in developing countries. In the BRICS and countries like China, we see this so fast, as we were saying earlier, the changes. We're trying to just understand what's going on. One of the programs that one of our first programs that GAIN had was to get iron-fortified soy sauce available to deal with anemia. And as we've done sentinel surveys, we found that actually, even with this obesity and richer Chinese, in fact, those same people have much higher rates of anemia than the poorer ones. So, we don't really even understand some of the things that are going on.
Yeah, it's
Jason,
funny.
I'd like to also say that we're seeing a very dramatic gradient in a developed country, namely the U.S., in relationship to poverty, so that obesity is very much associated with lower financial resources in the U.S. and is an issue that further adversely affects people who already have very few resources. So it's not just a developing world issue in any way.
But maybe paradoxically, in China, as I understand, the richer you are, the fatter you are. Mm-hmm. It's almost like a sign of opulence or a sign of, I wonder whether that is in a country which has a history and a culture of poverty, of malnutrition. What does that do to the mindset as that country develops? Now, Paul, we've mentioned nutrition, and to a large extent, the food companies are to be congratulated because have played a big role in terms of tackling some of the undernutrition issues in developing countries. But at the same time, you guys are under attack, right? So you could say, look, this is a fantastic KPI. People are getting fatter. You guys are selling lots of stuff. From a food industry perspective, what's your take on this issue of obesity? How does a food company grow, make money, increase profitability by selling less food?
It's definitely not one of my objectives just to sell less food per se. I mean, But first of all, going back to the problem, it is indeed a very complex problem. It is linked with genetics and epigenetics and etc. And that's why you also say in developing countries, you go from undernutrition actually and low calories or under calories. All of a sudden, when there's more calories, you get to obesity because also you have many reactions of we never had calories. The body is profiled for that. So whatever calorie that comes in, it keeps it on. So you really have many reasons and many. It's very complex. Now, at the end of the day, it is intake out, in and out, and that is linked with many reasons. So the equation is very simple, but the reasons why. And yes, indeed, we are a food and beverage company, so we sell food, and we are part of that equation, and we are very much aware of that. So we take that very seriously, and yes, we are attacked, and that comes a little bit because we are living in a society that you want to blame. So you want to make it simple. Who is to blame? That's his fault, and we assume that we are part of that equation, and that's why we coming out of several panels during the last days talking about that multi-stakeholder, meaning that all players in society, policymakers and all that, should take this as a common purpose to really be part of the solution there, and we are engaged in that too. Now you see, there is so many things we can do as a company too. And we work on that. And first of all, you can make, because food at the end of the day, we have to be very honest, food, we see, and Nestlé, we define it by 3 dimensions. Food should taste well because it's part of your wellness. And that's why you invite people around your table, and that's why you stay in fact. Food should taste well. It should be pleasure. And as a company, we have to create that. Now, that is also the argument that is used against us. You make it so pleasureful, they take too much from it. So then we have to deliver that pleasure with balance. And we can use R&D for that. That's why we invest heavily in how can we give that pleasure with less baddies, if you want. And there's many answers there. And then the other thing, which I feel is the most important one, is understanding. And understanding is linked with us investing in knowing as a company, and knowing also and finding solutions, but also understanding of the consumer, that he understands what nutrition is all about. And that is then linked again with education. When I went to school, I never had 1 hour education on nutrition, and yet I have to cope and I have to decide for myself several times a day. Education definitely is part of that. How can we be part of that as a company? Well, we have programs in all parts of the world, developed and developing, about healthy kids programs and how we build that in the programs of the schools. And we're not even named there, but we induce that with governments and the health departments and so on. It is that understanding that I do believe is really the biggest part of the equation of the solution. Understanding as a society that this is a multi-stakeholder, multi-sectorial issue that has to be solved by all partners, and that everybody has to be part of that. For example, we are working we are making a pledge for healthy living now, and that's actually linked also with the health care, the pharmaceutical industry. They're asking the same questions. And writing a pledge that says we are committing ourselves to be part of that societal issue and part of that solution, and engaging then, be it governmental or civil society at large. And I think there is good dynamics. And yet it is sports, healthy. We are doing quite a few programs with the amateur athletics because also should reduce caloric intake, yes, but we should definitely also increase again physical activity. So I feel it is an epidemic. It is a big thing, and actually obesity is only part because you have non-communicable diseases actually that are underlying. So it's even more and broader. But it has solutions, and I do feel good traction and good understanding and mutual interest of all parties of society at large. And it doesn't help only to blame one part, and that's actually, but I know. Well, I assume.
Well, shifting over to another industry player here, and when we talk about business models, it's I said from the food industry, obviously. Maybe simplistically, the more you sell, the better it is. But from the insurance industry's perspective, in terms of health insurance, life insurance, the more unhealthy people are, the more you guys pay, right? So, in terms of the insurance industry, what's your take on causality here? You know so much about what goes wrong because of a history of claims. What's the insurance industry's take on the principal causes of obesity in this epidemic?
Well, I think most of the causes have been talked about. So there are a number of environmental factors. I think the discussion Linda and Lisa had around the way that urban cities are planned, there's been fantastic technological developments. We've been able to, all of us have been able to access cars. We've been able to use transportation devices that, reduce the amount of physical activity we take. I think socioeconomic factors is a really important point. There's research that suggests that you're 60% more likely to be obese if you come from a low socioeconomic group. There's also links with education. There's research again that suggests 80% more likely to be obese if you've spent 9 years or less in education. I think obesity, certainly you can't point to one specific cause. But I guess one thing we need to really bear in mind is what's the potential consequence of obesity. And from the insurance industry's perspective, the consequences can be really, really unfortunate. It's ill health and it's potentially even death. And what are these factors from? Well, it's across the board. So it's things like cancer, increased risk of cardiovascular disease. The risk factors for this, such as hypertension, type 2 diabetes, the risks increase exponentially. So if you have a BMI of 30, you're 10 times more likely to have type 2 diabetes than if you have a lower BMI. Once that reaches 35, that's over a period of 10 years, you're 80 times more likely to get type 2 diabetes. And by the time you reach a BMI of 40, a quarter will already have diabetes. I think that one of the most worrying factors is that if you look at the things which have driven massive improvements in cardiovascular disease and the ability to cure and to reduce this, this is a preventable disease, and the ability to reduce the incidence of it. We've made massive strides as a society around reducing smoking rates, but obesity and the risk of diabetes, this is the one thing we haven't been able to reduce as a society. And I think this causes huge strains on already strained public finances. And as an insurance industry, we are a pooling of risk concept. That's how insurance works. So we try and take as many risks as we can, and we need to charge a fair premium for the additional risk that somebody brings into that pool. So we charge, it's about 16% extra if you have a BMI of 30 and no other risk factors. As soon as you have major risk factors like diabetes, though, the costs do increase exponentially because the risk of you, unfortunately, suffering ill health because of it increases exponentially. So someone with a BMI of, say, 35 and they have diabetes, they're going to be paying twice as much for their life insurance. And they may well not be able to get disability cover from their employer because the risk is just so great. And I think that's a really unfortunate consequence of the society we live in.
A friend of mine on the insurance, a friend of mine runs Japan's largest online insurance company, and they reject anybody who is obese. Because it's online, I'm not entirely sure how that rejection comes onto the screen, but, rejected. But that is the insurance consequence of obesity. This has allowed us to segue, I guess, into the second sort of big thing. We've talked about the causes and why this is such an important thing. And now we go into some of the barriers. Why is this such a difficult issue to tackle? Alison touched on it. It's not like smoking where there's one cause. You stop smoking and that's it. Linda, can I throw to you again here now? The complexity of this issue. Could you talk a little bit about that? Why has it been... the World Health Organization said in 1997 this is an epidemic, and yet we don't seem to have made a lot of progress. Why is that?
Not only haven't we made progress, but actually the rates continue to go up. And I would say that if you try and define the magnitude of the problem, you could say that in another 20 years, if they continue to increase the way they are, it may well be that 50 to 60% of the world's population, adult population, could be overweight at those rates. So not only is it a problem, but it's going in the wrong direction. And it's going in the wrong direction to the magnitude that might even, if this were an infectious disease, we might call it a pandemic. It's not regional, it's global. It is increasing rapidly. It is continuing to escalate. Those are the basic definitions of a pandemic. Now, the challenge is we've never had a pandemic that we've called non-communicable before. And we don't really have the approaches down for shifting from a mindset with pandemics of we go in with a SWAT team, we keep it from being communicated, we stop it from spreading, and then we're done. This is a completely different kind of problem. As Paul said, this is a classic 21st century complex systems problem, where enough things had to change simultaneously or in a brief period of time to cause this major shift in our aggregate weight and to have it keep getting worse. And there's no silver bullet, and in addition, the thing that makes it problematic is that we would like a silver bullet. But the truth is that once you become significantly overweight or obese, it's very hard. It takes a huge amount of work over a prolonged period of time to lose it, and treatment is not uniformly successful, and it's not without side effects, and it's costly for the individual and for society. And so the solution is on the side of prevention, and we don't do prevention so well. Prevention is a long, sustained commitment that sure has to do with how I mind my own behaviors, but it has to be in the context of us collectively agreeing to create the conditions to be healthy. And that collective agreement, not just in terms of my family and my community and our culture and our norms, has to extend to every part of our lives. I mean, consider the fact that in many countries of the world, the portion size in restaurants has increased dramatically over the last 20 years. So in places like New York, where I come from, where people eat out a lot, the size of the portion you're being served matters. So there are many dimensions that have to be solved in concert because no one of them is going to be sufficient in itself.
Thanks, Linda. Paul and then Lisa.
The question why we're not on the way of solution yet is also, first of all, it has come very fast. It has come very fast. If you think in, 10 years, 20, 30 years, that's very fast. And secondly, it has many reasons. And another epidemic has one reason specifically, you can go against that. So that's, and we like that. One reason we go against, that's how we are, but it is not like that. So there is not one solution. There's many solutions that has, or many actions that has to converge. And actually, there's not one solution per problem. We have in many markets, in many countries, you have actually undernutrition. You have the double burden, in other words. And how do you go about that? Because maybe you reduce the caloric and you disserve part of society, and to correct other part of society. So it's not simple. That's why I believe that it's not so that we don't have an answer, or we didn't answer yet. And I do believe also, and that may sound as defensive, but I do believe also that we are not served as a society to just see the reason in one part of society, and not engaging in really in working together to give a solution, because there the solution is definitely from all sides of society. The other part is, this is a journey. This is going to take time. And that's something we have. We're not used to that again, that we want a solution now, a little bit like slick a pill and that's it. That problem doesn't have a solution like that. So it is, and I mentioned it before, it is linked with education, it is linked with companies like ours having the awareness, acting upon that, having the research, all that, communication. But it's going to take a journey, but a journey starts with first steps. And although we don't have all the answers, although we don't know what every stage that we're going to have to tackle, but we should start really engaging much more and faster all together against it. And the long journey starts with the first step, and we should take it.
Thanks, Paul. Lisa.
Yeah, I just would build on those comments, and thank you, Paul and Linda. I couldn't agree with you more in many ways. So as it relates to how these issues have become so systemic and what we can do about it. On the physical activity side, I think what we've seen is we've sort of looked over to the nutrition side, and we've really seen that on the nutrition side, this problem is being looked at in a very complex, sophisticated way. It's being problem solved for in a very systemic way. And there's been some really good thinking and strategies put in place to start to get after it. One of the things that's holding us back in our view is that while it's good to continue to talk about obesity, how urgent it is, how prevalent it is, it certainly draws the attention of the world in. We've got to get to root cause faster, and having a sophisticated conversation about nutrition and a sophisticated conversation about physical activity in particular is important, because today we're certainly not solving for the physical inactivity crisis at the same level of sophistication that we are on the nutrition side. And I think that's where we've got extraordinary opportunity. We do still have a preconception that it's up to the individual to just get off the couch. And as I've mentioned before, until we get to really understanding that even on the physical activity side, we have some real systemic issues to solve here, we're not going to make as much progress as we otherwise would.
Thanks, Mark.
Well, yeah, I think as we, kind of unpack some of the drivers, I think we do need to look at the whole issue that I don't think markets are working in a very positive way in terms of solving malnutrition and overweight and obesity. I think, in fact, the way we see markets working are accelerating these trends very rapidly. And I do think there are some food and beverage companies which are doing quite a bit, but the majority are not doing a great deal. So I think as we look at some of the barriers, it's how do we start to look at the market forces that are at play here, and maybe you want to get to that right after this, or do you want?
No, can you elaborate on that? I mean, say supply chain. I was having a conversation with somebody about healthy food, and he said, look, there is no supply chain. There is no effective supply chain for healthy food, because fresh food, it goes off faster. Food with a lot of fat, sugar, salt as a preservative, it lasts longer, it's easier to transport. So in terms of the supply chain element of food, do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, yeah, I think supply chains are part of it, the way subsidies work. I mean, if you look at the money that goes into producing cheap corn and corn syrup-related products versus subsidies that go to fruit and vegetables, in the U.S. are not in the same sphere at all. So, if we wanted to have those kind of supply chains, and we've seen in some countries where they've invested heavily in trying to get a more diverse diet available and reducing the costs, they have actually been able to do that. But I think for many of the largest food and beverage companies, that has not been a priority. Some certainly have moved and brought nutrition into their core mission, into their core business, auditing their processes, but a lot of them, haven't spent much effort. They think it's more of a corporate social responsibility thing. They haven't put a lot of effort in reformulating products. They haven't changed dramatically their marketing. So there's a real uneven performance in the sector, and I think we, and we also see with a lot of the pledges that have been made voluntarily, that in some countries where there's a lot of consumer activism, they get filled, but in poor countries where there isn't any, they're not met. So I think we have to look at, how can we make this sector work better? How can we recognize the ones who are making investments? I think one of the things we saw this year is one of the leading companies who was moving in this direction more aggressively was not rewarded by their shareholders and has actually had to pull back a bit. So, we can let this play out, but I don't think we have a lot of time because of the pace of I think Linda called it a pandemic. The pace of change is so quick that we actually have to do things quickly. It's already at 1.4 billion people. I mean, that's massive in such a short time. So how do we take on the whole market side of this and put the political economy aspect right onto the agenda?
On product innovation, I'm still waiting for the low-fat, high-fiber Big Mac. Linda, did you had a...
So I think we need to break down the different components of the supply chain that you brought up. And I'll give a few examples because they occur at many different levels. Some of them, like the corn subsidies that Mark was talking to, are a throwback to a different era, which may have had justifiable reasons at that time, but at this moment in time, given what's happening, are not serving us well. But there are other things, like the need for education needs to be supported perhaps on the corporate side by standards for nutrition labeling so that educated people can make sense of what they're purchasing and eating. And certainly, again, to cite New York, because sometimes it's been pushing the envelope on things, New Yorkers were very worried when Mayor Bloomberg mandated the implementation of calorie labeling for fast foods and franchise food sold in franchises on, in retail. But New Yorkers have learned that it serves as a really good guide for what you want to purchase and eat. The other side of it, continuing on the local side, is that there are many places where there's no access to healthy foods, and when it's there, that it's just not affordable. I mean, you can go to, you cited the statistics on Mexico. I remember being in one city in Mexico about 10 years ago when the obesity epidemic was really already raging, and the public health physicians there were very concerned because, to their mind, the drivers of it were that poor families couldn't afford to make fresh tortillas and the contents, and that it was much cheaper to go to a fast food restaurant in order to feed their family. So all of these factors in the aggregate are conspiring, along with lack of grocery stores even in many pretty sophisticated cities, to be able to analyze every single point in that supply chain, I think, is really critical so that we get it right for people.
Thanks. Alison.
Yeah, just a couple of thoughts to add. And I think maybe we have to look at ourselves a little bit for this, but we do love convenience. So in office environments, we often find that people they'll choose to send an email or they'll pick up the phone instead of going and talking to someone who maybe is 100 meters down the corridor. And I think we have just become conditioned to getting immediate responses to things. We have technology like this that gives us immediate access on a mobile basis, and it reduces the amount we have to go. And I think that's a different issue for us as well, the fact that we don't have as much face-to-face communication as we do electronic. But so I think our own beliefs and the way that we prefer convenience over actually doing something, I think, is partly to blame, perhaps, and causes a bit of a challenge. And also productivity is the other thing I'd raise, that we have increasing need to be more productive, and that's one of the ways you can continue to help economies grow. And I think particularly for developing countries, that's very important to them, so that they can get on a level pegging with the developed world. But the way that productivity has arisen in the developed world has increasingly meant a reduction in the amount of activity we do. So I think we just need to be aware of the fact, the dual kind of evils of our desire for convenience and the drives for productivity, and just think about different ways that we can do that, which will continue to increase our physical activity.
This is a nice segue into talking about some solutions. Let's spend a few minutes on that now. On the activity side, there was a session yesterday where there were some amazing statistics, and I wanted to ask you about this, Lisa, about the amount of physical activity it takes. Just half an hour of walking a day can have a profound impact on your health. We heard an example yesterday of a CEO who takes all of his meetings on the treadmill. That goes to productivity, right? In terms of a solution, the increasing physical activity, talk to us about that.
Well, so we've been looking at this extensively, and we are seeing, we worked with 70 expert organisations around the world that have really been focused on the physical activity agenda. And every country in the world almost has a physical activity agenda. I think what we saw is that no one's investing in it, actually. When you get down to the individual level, after working with this set of experts around the world, we came up with two things. And it's kind of refreshing because when you look at the national physical activity agendas, they're all 1,000-point plans. So the faster we can get to simple, effective measures that we can all rally behind and have a common framework that we can all move in the same direction, I think the better. So the two recommendations that came out of this process, actually, and it's published in this piece of work called Design to Move, are creating, number one, creating early positive experiences for children in sports, physical activity, in general physical play and physical education. And we know that's important because preferences and motivations form very early in life. So an inactive kid who is basically getting all of his or her pleasure from watching video games, movies, sedentary activities, and gets, you know, an enormous amount of pleasure out there, they're more likely to adopt those behaviours into their adulthood. Whereas an active kid who's getting their pleasure and enjoyment from physically active options, again, we know from the brain research that they are going to be more predisposed to having a physically active life. So ask number one, regardless of what actor you are in an economy, is to find ways to create early positive experiences for children. The second principle and the second ask is to reintegrate physical activity back into life. So we've talked a lot about how we, over time and very quickly, engineered movement out. We need to figure out how to engineer it back in, whether it's in the workplace. So how do we have walking meetings? How do we check our email while we're on the treadmill or while we're on a spinning bike? There are many different ways to re-look at how the workplace is set up so that we are not sitting behind our desks for 8 to 12 hours a day. This is going to require a very conscious effort, though. We've also got to look in schools. How do we redesign schools so that we can reintegrate physical activity into those environments? Because we have defined the learning experience for kids today. The normal learning experience for them is sitting behind a desk. When we know that a physically active kid is going to have a 40% higher rate of scoring in his test results, as an example. So in many ways, we've designed things to be physically inactive. It's irrational based off of the benefits. The more we can look at very simple ways to redesign physical activity back into the school system, back into how we design our communities, and back into how we design our workplace, the faster. So 2 asks, early positive experiences and reintegrating physical activity back into life.
Okay, so that's the physical activity side. Now, what about on the calories in sort of side? So if we're looking at solutions here, solutions from government, solutions from industry, policies. Mark, can I throw to you? What would be your sort of top 3 things that we could do right now? Well, simple things.
Well, I think the first thing really needs to be around how we regulate the food and beverage sector. And firstly, I think we really need to see, can we make this self-regulation process work more effectively and put some teeth into it? So, you know, strengthening it with you know, independent audit processes and much more transparency and review on, you know, on whether companies, not only the global ones, but also nationally, are performing along the kind of commitments that are being made. So, I mean, I think it's great we're trying the voluntary route, so let's try and make it work. But I think at the same time, there has to be a public policy response. I mean, I think Linda was mentioning what has happened in New York. You know, I do think, you know, taxes and regulating sizes of servings, it's not going to work across the board, but in some areas, I think it can work, and I think certainly if it creates a level playing field for all of the private sector to work at the same level, it can work. I mean, one of the things that we've seen in the undernutrition area, in the area of staple food fortification, is that, you know, nobody wanted mandatory laws that you had to add micronutrients into staple foods, but then once countries imposed a standard, and this is the way it is, you know, all the companies work quite well within that, and we see in places 80% coverage of micronutrients. So, you know, I think there's a combined approach. So I think so the public policy piece we need to put up. I think the third part is we do, and I think Paul mentioned at the beginning, we do need to move into much more of a multi-stakeholder platform where we have some accountability mechanism where we're holding people each to account, and we have some clear targets that we want to get to. Those don't exist right now. So I think, if we have some good information on how performance is, how companies are operating, and we have a much more rigorous multi-stakeholder process that can call out those who are meeting targets, I would see that's really the way I would go.
I think Paul's got something to say here.
Coming back a little bit, Mark, on regulations, I think that's why they put us on the extremes. But I'm the first to say you need to frame. So framing regulations, definitely. You need to frame. I always say governments should make the framing, and industry and economy should make the painting. Sometimes governments want to make the painting. And so framing regulations, yes. Over-regulations now, because then you asphyxiate initiatives, you asphyxiate the creativity, new solutions and all that. So we have to find a balance. And that's why I said the discussion and dialogue is definitely something that we have to continue. That's for sure. Now, for example, we as a company, and I don't want to sell here at my company, there's so many other companies doing the same things, and we have platforms where we connect as companies and associations and all that to do that, but we have already for many years a mandatory policy on sugar, for example, or trans fatty acids, etc., of Nestlé for all our operations worldwide over. And these policies, they induce that, for example, in the overall sugar content of our products has reduced by 1/3 over the last years, because if you frame right also internally, and you walk consistently in the same direction, you get somewhere. And so these are, and many industries do that. We share that also in associations like the Consumer Goods Forum, for example, where we have manufacturers and quite sizable ones and small ones worldwide over, and we have also the retailers, because that's how you connect with consumers. We are working together, and we have a health pillar where we work specifically on what we do towards consumers, how can we impact, etc., how can we condition. So a little bit of leveraging, when we spoke about the supply chain, the leveraging is there to a certain extent. We do have operations all over the world, and we are competing with local players and to a certain we are shaping with local governments that framing together. So call it a little bit of a dissemination of best practice and self-discipline to a certain extent. We have no interest to smart society out short term. We are a long-term perspective company. So, and that short-term, that long-term perspective creates quite a lot of attitudes that are, I would say, self-discipline to a certain extent, because it's a matter of survival for society, but also of companies. So in that sense, I would say leverage can be there. Leverage can be there and is actually there. And what we are speaking about, this pledge that we talk, that's leveraging. That's leveraging purpose, I would say, towards these issues on society at large. And that is something that we can influence. We are a small company, if you see the perspective of food, yet we can make a big thing, a big difference. Then the second one, we have also, what can we do inside our walls? Because we have quite a few people working in Nestlé and the Walmarts, and so the healthy workplace, for example, staircases. All these little things that you can build in a natural way. So it is, again, not a project per se. You should build things into the normal life. And we can do quite a bit there too. If you add it all up, that Consumer Goods Forum where we're part of, if you add it all up, it's something like 4 million people, 5 million people working for only the people who are part of that association. That's a lot of families. And so you can influence quite a bit.
I'm going to throw to Alison and Lisa next, but just as a feeling from this conversation, I feel like we're tiptoeing around this a little bit more, in the sense that if we talk about increasing physical activity, etc., a 45-minute high-intensity workout at the gym would probably burn you about 500 to 600 calories. A Whopper meal, would probably be over 1,000 calories. So in order to burn off that meal or bring that down to a regular level, you're going to have to do a lot of high-intensity exercise. Isn't there something here around clearer food labeling, clearer information around high-fat, high-sugar, high-salt, very calorie-dense foods? And what happens to the marketing, how these things are marketed to children, etc.? I'm going to go to Alison and then to Lisa.
So I'll probably say that's Paul's question to answer around food labelling. I'm not sure the insurance industry probably is a great can offer a huge amount of advice on that. Well, one thing that I think we can do, though, as an insurance industry, and I think we absolutely must do far more of it, is to provide real incentives for people to have have a lower BMI, to be doing more physical exercise. I think there's only, unfortunately, a couple of good examples of things that people have done, and I think as an industry we must do far more. What you said earlier, Jason, about the Japanese life company who just doesn't accept people who have diabetes, I think that's the wrong answer as an industry. I think we have to find ways of making sure we can accept everyone and that we are trying to work to improve the health of the people who we look after. The two quick examples I give are that the first one is something called Road to Health, and it gives you a Q score. You can go on the internet, have a look. It provides you essentially with a number as to where you stand in the queue to death. So it's not perhaps the funnest thing, but you put in things like your blood pressure, it calculates your BMI for you, and it says, okay, based on the amount of exercise you do, based on the kind of food intake you have, this is where you stand relative to your peer group. So if you're 35, then here's where you stand. And you want to be obviously at the better end of the rating. But a couple of insurance companies have really picked this up, and they've said, okay, well, if you use this tool regularly, so if you keep it updated, and if you show us what you're doing, so you regularly get your blood pressure monitored, then we'll give you a discount on your insurance. So you are taking action to try and improve your own health, and we'll recognise that. And then there's a similar type scheme in South Africa called Vitality, which gives you points, and it rewards you for taking whether you're going to a medical centre and getting your bloods taken, other fluids taken, so that they can assess how fit you are and what your prevalence of disease would be. But the more that you take action, the more points you get, and you can spend your points on whatever you want. So I think there are instances of innovation, but I think these must improve because, as I said before, insurance is about mutuality of risk, and I think we need to work hard to ensure that everybody is insurable.
Thanks, Lisa.
Yes, we were talking about multi-stakeholder collaboration and how important those things are as it relates to resolving these very systemic issues. The role of policy is going to be critical, and I think that's probably where you were going as it relates to food labelling, and again, probably from Nike's perspective, not something that I'll get too deep into here. But what I would say where we have an opportunity, particularly to leverage the physical activity side of the discussion and have more sophisticated conversations in that realm, is that the benefits of physical activity extend so far and beyond weight management. And I do believe that the way that the world is looking at physical activity today is literally just to manage waistlines. And we know the research stacks up in a very powerful way that active kids, 40% more likely to score higher on tests. They transition through the workplace much more successfully to earn more. They're more productive, more creative, innovative. And then we also know that they pass that behaviour. The research is also showing that active parents have active kids. And so this is one of those cycles that can perpetuate, it can accelerate economies, and therefore there are many more stakeholders in this equation that we can pull into this discussion. And I think that's where the opportunity is. So we know that no one's going to solve it alone. We want as many or multi-sectoral and multi-stakeholders solving for this as possible. And if you take a look, again, focusing on physical activity for the time being, the education sector is going to clearly benefit because kids will perform better. Corporations have a stake in this because we know that their employees, if they're physically active, are going to be more productive and creative. Homeland Security, particularly in the United States, has a massive stake in this because today there's just frankly not a big enough pool of fit Americans passing the test to adequately maintain the armed forces. So there are pools of resources today. If we look at this issue a little more broadly, that can really be part of resolving these issues. And I do believe that we do have a massive opportunity on the physical activity side.
Okay, thanks. A comment from Linda, and then we're going to open it up to you guys. So, Linda.
So first, as a public health physician, I have to support what Lisa just said, that physical activity has huge numbers of benefits, which include productivity, but how well you feel, and it actually tunes up all of the systems in your body practically. That's an hour-long discussion in itself, but a brief summary. The challenge is how to create the conditions, which Lisa can speak to quite elegantly, so that we become more physically active, not just any one of us, but all of us, But the challenge also is on the balance side, which Jason was talking about. So you drink a 20-ounce sugared soda, you have to walk 4.5 miles to walk it off. So how do we educate people to understand that? That's one thing. How do we create the conditions so that we have better alternatives? That's another thing. In fact, the challenge is that, as all the panelists have said, every sector and every individual has to be in on the solution here or it won't work. So every one of us in this room needs to ensure that our families and communities and our workplace are engaging in the practices that can help us be healthy, that there's access to the food and nutrition and activity that we need. But at a global level, at a governmental level, we also need to think about whether we need to set different kinds of standards. There are many issues going on around food. There's food scarcity, there's undernutrition, as Mark was saying, there's overnutrition. There are the factors that are driving obesity. I would suggest that we perhaps need to think about a new approach, like a global framework for food systems broadly, that provides at least the guidance and expectations and knowledge globally as to how we set standards, how we accomplish the most healthful approaches, and that can really provide a framework under which everybody can rally.
Great, thanks.
Very fast.
Sure.
Definitely, I do believe also that the outtake, or if you eat one croissant, you have to go to the North Pole. Definitely is not. I do believe that there's also really measuring the and physical activity basically is also for global health more than just getting rid of calories. But now I want to just to look into the food labeling, which is very important, the transparency, and that we totally support for meaningful labeling, and that's why the GDAs and actually all our products, for example, as a company, we impose ourselves, all our products, they should have a nutritional compass and also a link so that people can get in more detail. But then again, at the other side, you have to educate, because it is a matter of also having somebody who can really read through. And I just want to phrase again that education, nutritional education, is so important for the future of all these issues. And that's a long-term thing, so we better start doing that. And governments, they have an obligation of putting education, also physical activity, back into the program. You see, actually, in many areas of the world, the developed world, the physical education has been taken off of the school programs. Shame on governments, because also governments, they have an obligation and governance on these things towards society at large. And there again, I think the voice of everybody is important also to oblige the policymakers to really maintain and induce a balance for the individuals. Another dimension is the personal responsibility. In our society, and everybody has to assume their responsibility, but also the person towards himself. And somewhere we have gone in society and into a dimension that nobody is responsible for himself anymore. We're going to care, we're going to care for you, don't care for yourself. Somewhere we have to also, through education, bring that back somewhere. And I think that is a little bit more underlying philosophical, societal discussion, but anyhow, I think it is important in this discussion too.
Thanks, Paul. Okay. We've had a great discussion amongst the panel. We're just going to open it to you guys now. What I suggest, it's an hour and a half is a long time to be sitting down. If people would like to, why don't we stand up for a second, just sort of stretch our legs a bit, and it'll wait. Okay, so now Nike's going to lead the calisthenics. So, okay. Okay, now, so we'd like to hear from you guys now. Now, some rules of the house. please confine your remarks to questions, please. No political statements, no grandstanding, no electioneering speeches. We'd like to hear questions, pithy, short questions, please. Now, there are some roaming mics around here. I see this gentleman here in the middle in the suit.
Thank you. I'm Dr. Mark Hyman, a physician, chairman of the Institute for Functional Medicine that looks at systems solutions to chronic disease. The issue I want to address here is behavior change. How do we affect behavior change? Because that's the holy grail. We can change the food supply, we can regulate, we can improve defaults in the environment that promote exercise, and all these important initiatives, which are all necessary. But the key question is, how do we change behavior? And is it really about personal responsibility? And I would just challenge that idea, because in research we found that you're more likely to be overweight if your friend's friend is overweight than if your parents are overweight, and that our social connections drive our behavior. Just briefly, we did a social experiment in a church, 15,000 people, got them engaged in a healthy living curriculum delivered through peer support small groups. We found that in a year they lost 250,000 pounds and reversed a whole slew of diseases. This is borne out in research just in JAMA last month that showed that intensive lifestyle intervention could reverse disease through these group support models. And I think we have to begin to think about changing the conversation from solely personal responsibility to how do we change the structures and community-based solutions that are going to drive the behavior change. So I'd like to hear from the panel about how they're thinking about really changing this behavior, because that's the holy grail.
Thanks. Why don't we do this? Why don't we take sets of 3 questions, so that will speed it up, and then I'll ask the panel to respond to all 3 where they're comfortable. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Catherine Hagan. I'm from Geneva, working with a program called the Global Social Observatory. We have been addressing multi-stakeholder collaboration on non-communicable diseases, and one of our main conclusions in this was that there is a central role for governments. There is no government representative on this panel, although you have been touching on the need for government action. But it's been mostly oriented to a public policy on this or an action on that, rather than a central role for government as part of the engagement in multi-stakeholder collaboration.
Please.
And my question then is, how would you then bring government into this kind of central role, which certainly is a very important part of how you stimulate multi-stakeholder collaboration in such areas as undernutrition, which is a very important issue, as well as the overnutrition issues.
Okay, great. Over here in the middle, the gentleman with the spectacles.
Hello, my name is Joshua Kim, and I can't agree more to the doctor that there's a huge need for behavioral change, and that government actually has a role, has to take out any collective action towards this problem. And do you, Mr. Bulcke and Ms. Carter, do you think that the firms actually have responsibility to cooperate with the government to prevent and extirpate any further problems? And if you say yes, and if you say no, could you specify on some pros and cons of cooperation with the government? Thank you.
Okay, let's tackle those. Why don't we go right to left here? And can I ask the panel to keep comments brief here? We want to give everybody from the audience a chance to have a go.
So very brief on behavior change. Well, I think you start also, for example, in your own company. Or in your own family. It's walk the talk, but in our own company, the healthy workplace, for example. I spoke about staircases. If you see the staircases, it's when the house is on fire only that it is used. Well, start to animate them, start to paint them nice. It's so many small actions. Again, we can rationalize this to death, but what we should do is really start with the logic and the common sense, and that is inducing, again, a healthy workplace. And for example, on nutrition, we have a nutrition quotient, we call it, an education, because we feel if we want to stand as a company for nutrition and wellness, well, all our employees, they should get education on nutrition. And we have a course that we induce through the whole organization. 330,000 people are going through these courses. That's where behavior change starts, because that goes to family, etc. Very fast on multi-stakeholder. I mentioned very fast the Healthy Kids program. I'm a true believer of education, so you start with kids. And we have a program in 60 plus countries that is linked with educating kids. And that we don't do us as a company. We do that with government, be it the health departments or education, and they do it through their system, their school system. What we do is sharing best practice, base material, no branding. Also, we keep it distance there, because we truly believe that also our company long term is better served with educated consumers. So these are a very, very concrete dimension where we work together. And I must say, governments, they do feel their role. But we can help to induce it and help it to shape it. And best practice in many developing markets is easy to enroll. So these are very concrete examples.
Thanks, Paul. Linda?
So I agree with the prior statements. If I think about, do we need to change behavior and how do we do it? Well, the answer is absolutely yes. And in fact, individuals need to change their behavior, families and communities need to change their aggregate behavior, and corporations and governments need to change their behavior. We're all in this one together, and everybody's got to play their part. Governments need to take responsibility for what is within their control. How they ensure, for example, that health is a responsibility of every department of government, not just the department that has health in its name, because so many things we've just been talking about are outside of the purview of the health department. Every section of government has to be responsible and has a responsibility to set standards and expectations and create the conditions to facilitate individuals and families and communities taking responsibility.
I'd like to address the behaviour change one first. So I'd probably problem solve for that, and I couldn't agree more. We have to go in that direction without question. Let's start creating demand for things like physical activity and high nutrition foods. So 2 concrete ways that I would throw out there today. Again, from the brain research, we know that if we create these early positive experiences for kids, and we know that the window to do that that's going to have the most impact is between about the ages of 7 and 12. If we can create early positive experiences in physically active options, broad sports, play, whatever it is, they are going to be more predisposed in their adulthood to choose and demand it in the future. So that would be number one. Number two, I think we have an extraordinary opportunity to inspire here. So one of the things that we did at Nike was we did 500 interviews across the world in 9 different cities. And regardless of whether it was a Chinese kid or whether it was an American kid or whether it was a German kid, we learned that kids who are inactive have a very narrow definition of sport today. They think of high pressure things like competing in basketball or football. And so if that is a barrier to kids participating in sports, we need to fix that. And so one of the things that Nike and other organisations in the sporting goods industry can do is look at ways to communicate to kids, reach them in ways that we can broaden the definition of sports, broaden the definition of what active play looks like, and inspire kids to participate. On the government, the pros and cons of working with the government, and do we have a responsibility? I would say we have an opportunity to work with governments without question. We have levers as corporations. The government has very different levers, and so we want as many levers in this equation as possible to pull in order to fix it. There are challenges though, so pros and cons wise, without going into detail, I guess, is that it is tough. It's tough, but we have to do it. So we just need to figure out how we look at our different personality traits between how a corporation is incented and who the types of people are that usually are attracted to corporations, and balance that with who works in the government industries and figure out how to blend them together. But it is it's tough and it takes time.
Thanks, Lisa. Alison and...
So just very quickly, I think it is a multi-stakeholder challenge. So we need everyone working together, whether it is governments, who clearly need to take a very central role in this, employers, individuals. We all have a responsibility. I think there's lots of things that some employers are doing which are great, and we need to continue to encourage these. The company I work for, Swiss Re, we have a cycle to work scheme. We have gym memberships. We take action to try and encourage a healthier workforce. I think there's lots of great examples of employers doing similar things around the world. From an insurance industry perspective, we can offer discounts for people who do that. So employers who have a healthier workforce pay less for their group life schemes. They pay less for their group disability schemes because they can demonstrably measure that it is important to them to have a healthier workforce. I think if we all take small steps, then we can collectively improve this.
Thanks.
Yeah, I would, support what everyone else has said. I mean, it isn't the individual's responsibility only. I mean, we do need to really look towards it being a shared responsibility amongst all the stakeholders to change behavior. But I also think we need to be a lot more creative. I mean, demand, consumers don't demand nutritious products, and there's very little awareness, and that has a big public health challenge. We should be moving more towards these partnership arrangements where we are doing more broader, unbranded campaigns that on an ongoing basis create that kind of awareness and demand. And it's a win-win. It's a win-win from a public health side, and it's a win-win for companies who start to have a more conducive environment. So that's one point. The second point on the multi-stakeholder process in government, I think in the undernutrition space, we've set up about 15 national multi-stakeholder processes, and we found unless government is actually in the center and driving them, they don't work. And that's a problem too, because one day you have a minister of health who's really excited, and then the next minister comes and has a totally different view of the world, and everything falls apart. So you just have to deal with that. But unless government is playing that central role, it won't happen.
Okay, great. Let's take a few more questions here. Can I add one more thing here? Could you tell us who you want to direct your question towards? Let's speed this up because I want to give everybody a chance to have a say. So, gentleman over here, gentleman back there. Who have we got from the back? Gentleman over there in the blue jumper.
Good morning, my name is David Eberly. I'm a journalist for Tribune de Genève in Switzerland. And I have a question for everybody. Do you know your personal BMI? And more specific questions to science people. Is this an index we can trust? Because there's been a lot written about it's too severe. It's too. Everybody is obese with BMI. Thank you.
Who did we have? There was a gentleman over. There was a gentleman over. There was a gentleman over there in the blue jumper, and there was. Yes, thank you.
Yes, my name is Stefan Kleinsorge from Strasbourg in France. I have a question to Mark, because Linda mentioned that obesity is a global problem. It is even pandemic, and we have global players in the food company. Is this a coincidence? And this leads to the sub-question to Linda. We see that the food industry reduces the quality of food permanently by replacing natural ingredients by natural identic aromas and modified starch. And then they engage in government programs of education and amateur athletics. Is this not hypocritical? And shouldn't food companies be excluded from these education programs? And Paul talked about meaningful labeling, but we still see on Nestlé muesli that the muesli plus an apple plus the milk is shown, and the added up calories, thereby distracting from the high calories of the muesli itself. Would you change that?
Okay, thank you. There was one more. There was one more question from a gentleman in the middle, and I can't remember who it is. So over there. Yeah, thanks.
I am Peter van Ham from Belgium, journalist. And I have a question for a fellow Belgian, Mr. Bulcke. And my question is how you incorporate in your strategy, in your future strategy, growth strategy, the fact that you find nutrition such an important issue and malnutrition. And specifically, I was honored to be a guest of yours in Switzerland, in the headquarters, and I got a tour of all the products you have in the world. And one of the recent acquisitions you had done, if I remember correctly, was a Chinese company that produced candy. And so my question is, how do you how does that fit into each other? Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, brief responses from the panel.
I know my BMI, and it's okay. and that's a proof of my personal responsibility because I live with all chocolate around. So I think scientists are going to say if that's worthwhile something to BMI, but again, we can over sophisticate the discussion. It is a useful measure, though. So somewhere, I mean, then we had this specific question about obesity is global companies. So is that a relationship? That's a very dangerous equation of logic. I mean, there's the same logic of I fit in my pajama fits in my luggage, I fit in my luggage. It is clear that has no relationship whatsoever, because at the end of the day we are a sizable company, and yet we are very, 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 very small in the perspective and in the scale of what food is in the world. But still, yes, indeed, I don't hide responsibility there. We have a leading role to play and to shape agendas and to induce to R&D, etc., healthier food, and that is what we do. On the muesli specific, I am not going to go to the specific of muesli, but then I know one thing, that perception is reality, and we have to change perceptions. And you have the breakfast cereals, and they have a perception that apparently it's the worst thing you can have. But if you then I compared it already with a croissant, and I love a croissant. Now, a croissant and a boil of muesli and all that, well, I would stick with muesli then. But you see, that is how life is. It's balance. And when you have on a Sunday and you want to have a good croissant, have it. And look for balance in these things. I have mentioned that before. Then the corporate purpose of our company, you know that we want to stand for a company that has as an agenda, nutrition, health, and wellness, we call that. It is really allowing people to make tastier and healthier choices, wherever they are, during the whole day, during their whole life, for their families and themselves. It is choices, and then they come again with tastier and healthier choices, and we can do quite a bit there. Now, we have indeed acquired a company in China that do sell candy. Now, I am a true believer also that we have ice cream too. And if you see and you give an ice cream on a very sunny summer day to a kid, and you see the sunshine in his eyes, I don't believe this can be so bad. But then again, don't give him 1 liter of ice cream, portionability and all that. And actually what we bought there is a company that is known for very small candies and a huge distribution. What does it allow us? First of all, we can bring in all what we know about better offerings and better taste with less sugar, and so that we can bring in a portfolio that exists anyhow. So we can bring that in. What we have also is now a distribution so that we can connect with more consumers with very, very, very healthy parts of our portfolios. So again, I don't believe we should not try as a company to hide behind our finger. We do have a portfolio, and we have said we want to be in different portfolios, different product categories, so that we can be meaningfully part of that health agenda of consumers during their whole life. And we want to be part of an equation that we want to bring quality of life to. Now, for example, ice cream. We invented a technology that allows to have the same enjoyment, and actually people prefer a slow churned ice cream. That is a technology that allows you to have an ice cream that has half the fat and 1/3 less calories. And then we portion that. And actually we have very, very original names for certain ice creams, like Skinny Cow. And yes, that is marketing. And you induce, and we can say, okay, Nestlé, go get out of ice cream. Get out of all that. That doesn't mean that these products are out of the world. So we feel that then staying there, we can be a meaningful part of positive energy there and being part of the solution. So I do feel these dimensions in our portfolio do fit in a company that stands for nutrition and health and wellness if we go responsibly about these issues.
Thanks, Paul. I think there was a question to Lisa and Linda. Do you want to? And there was a question to Mark. And then, if somebody else has something to say, by all means.
So I don't know my BMI, and don't stop selling ice cream because I love ice cream. Is BMI an effective measure? Well, here's what I'd say to that. Two things. We have the most physically inactive generation we've ever seen in history. Kids today have old people's diseases. A 10-year-old should not be worried about fatty liver disease. Okay, so they are measures for me that we should be standing up and paying urgent attention to. Secondly, this is an issue that is bankrupting economies. It costs the US today on an annual basis almost $150 billion a day. That is $150 billion annually. That is twice the entire federal education budget. To me, they're the measures that I would be paying attention to really create urgent action by everyone around these issues.
Thanks. Mark?
Yeah, I do know my BMI, and it's not true. But I think I think on the question of because we have obesity globally and global companies, are the two related? I mean, I partly agree with what Paul said, not about his pajamas, but about the correlation. Because most of the food that's consumed is not packaged and isn't driven by or processed driven by food companies. But I think you would see that in a lot of the markets, the leading global companies are the main players in the packaged food business, and they do set the trends. So it's they do have an influence, I think, for sure. And I guess maybe one of the questions that that came up in Paul's answers, not pointing at Nestlé's, but there's a big issue for some of the companies. Can you be seen as acting responsibly if you have a large part of your products which are very unhealthy, and then you have a smaller portion which are geared to healthy people? Is that whole portfolio responsible? Sure, it responds to choice, but where most of your marketing is going to be going to promoting unhealthy products. So I think there needs to be a debate on what is that whole product mix need to look like, and what's that balance that's appropriate. I think on the labeling issue, again, not speaking to Nestlé's, but for a lot of the companies, this is a very big issue. I think we have some very good players, but many of the big companies globally do not label things the same way in two markets, and they'll only label where they have to. And I think that's kind of behavior that really shouldn't be happening, and companies shouldn't be allowed to get away with.
Okay, we've got about 10 minutes left. A quick comment from Linda. I think she had something to say, and Alison.
So I do know my BMI, by the way, and it's a reasonable measure. Maybe not perfect for everybody, but reasonable. But this issue of expectations that was raised is a very important one. We have an emergency. We have a health emergency. It is global. It is of huge dimensions, and we need to expect that everybody attend to what the part of it that is under their control or their institution's control to solve it, because we can only solve it together. And that includes the responsibilities of corporations and government. We covered that. But, I've had the privilege of talking to leaders of a variety of food and beverage companies who are trying to improve their products significantly in response to our collective needs. And some of them say, we're putting products out that are so healthy, but people won't buy them. So we also need to take responsibility to ensure that efforts to go in the right direction are recognized.
Thanks. Alison?
So super quick, I calculated my BMI before coming to this panel, and it's fine. As to it being it is a blunt tool, let's be honest, it is a very blunt tool, but it is much better to have a blunt tool that gives you a directional view than no tool at all. So we're quite happy to use BMI for calculating for insurance.
Great. Let's try to get one more set of questions in. Okay, there was a gentleman here who's had his hand up for a while. right up the back there, the gentleman right up the back there in the, yep.
Hello, shall I go first or?
Go ahead.
So first off, good afternoon panel. Fantastic discussion so far. I would really like to address this question to a government personality, but since no one's there, I'm guessing Mr. Bulcke, you're the closest. I wanted to ask you...
I'm the closest to get out.
Fair enough. I wanted to ask regarding the fast food industry lobby, because it's so huge and many would agree that they're kind of the cause of obesity in many countries. You brought up the issue of policymakers and they need to address this, but how can they really with such a wall of lobbying against them? Thank you.
Thanks. The gentleman right at the end there.
Ich rede hier nicht für mich, ich rede nicht für mein Geschäft, nicht für meinen Beruf, ich rede für unsere Jugend. Und ich möchte sagen, der kürzeste Weg ist mir heute Morgen klar geworden, geht über die Eigenverantwortung. Das ist der schnellste Weg und wir können uns selber fragen, was machen wir mit unserem Kopf, was machen wir mit unserer Erziehung unter den Kindern, das ist das nächstliegende. Wissen wir, was wir am Morgen machen, wenn wir unsere Kinder vor den TV-Apparat setzen und sagen, da ist ja deine Kindergeschichte. Wissen wir, was wir ihnen zumuten mit der Werbung? Kennen wir die geheimen Verführer in der Werbung? Und wenn das Kind dann zu uns kommt und sagt, ich möchte bitte...
Entschuldigung, was ist Ihre Frage?
Ich habe keine Frage, das ist ein Beitrag. Ich habe Fragen genug gehört. Also, ich möchte damit sagen, kennen wir die geheimen Verführer? Wissen wir eine Antwort, wenn unser Kind kommt und sagt, ich möchte meinen Schokoriegel, den ich da eben gesehen habe? Hat die Mutter dann den Mut zum Sagen, mein Kind, ich habe jetzt eine rote Rübe, hier für dich ein frisches Gemüse. Macht man sich unbeliebt oder nicht?
Okay, vielen Dank.
Ich möchte sagen, die Eigenverantwortung ist das Wichtigste und das ist das, was zum kurzen Ziel führt. Danke sehr.
Vielen Dank. Is there another question from the audience? One more. The lady there with the red.
Hello, my name is Heidi Conrad. I'll become a teacher in sports, and my question goes to Miss Carter. You said we have to reintegrate sports and movement into our lives. So why don't we start now? Can you show us a little exercise? Like Liat Sen said, we have to begin with little steps. So why don't we start now?
I'm up for it. Maybe we can finish the session with a little jog on the spot.
Okay, so the questions, Paul, is the government? How would you regulate yourself?
Again, it was fast food and the might of lobbying and how can we... But first of all, I do believe also government should take their responsibility towards society, and so lobbying or no lobbying, they should do what... Now, I don't believe either that fast food is, again, the cause of all evil. I mean, it's part of society, and yes, indeed, hamburger or whatever, it's like pizza. You can go again, pizza. Pizza is a good thing. It is a very balanced food, but don't eat as an individual a whole family pizza. So in French, they say, le poison, c'est la dose. And that has to do, again, the bad thing is the size of things, you know, and exaggeration. Balance, again. Balance, how do balance come? It is linked with education and self-responsibility, coming up, again, for what Mr. there in the back in German said. I truly believe that self-responsibility also is corporate self-responsibility. And I do believe that many players are giving different offerings and more balanced offerings, etc. So I do believe in that positive interaction of industry and restaurants and all that with society at large. And it is true that you go to restaurants and you get portions served that are, I would say, not human. But then also people push back, say, I don't want this quantity. I mean, so I do believe in this interaction that is positively, and we are part of the solution. And that's what we want to be. We just don't want to be. The old society needs always to say who is to blame. There's a big problem in who, and not complex. One. Life is a little bit more interesting than that, and I'm happy to be part of that.
Thank you. In the interest of time, why don't we do this? We're just time is almost up. Why don't we go quickly across here? Final comments, just brief closing statements here, and then Lisa can lead us out with it.
Okay.
I think I've spoken enough. I mean, all parts of society, this is a big problem, and it comes fast and it's growing fast. Yet at the same time, we really can do something short term on these things. It's really doing something today. We as a company are putting a lot of R&D and all that, reformulating products differently, permanently, etc. We can also be part of the dialogue in society, and we are part of that too. We were in panels already this morning talking exactly about that, the healthy living, the lifestyles, and definitely also, I do believe, physical activity. And self-responsibility is definitely part of an equation and a solution there too.
Thanks.
So it's very clear from the rates of obesity, which have been escalating worldwide, that our lifestyle doesn't match our health needs. And we need to recognize the more blatant signs of that, which is overweight and obesity, and change our lifestyles so that we can stay healthy. And it's an emergency that we all do it starting now. One step is having conversations like this, and I just wanted to say thank you, because we do need to be asking these questions, finding the answers together, and having it foremost in all of our minds. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll speak on behalf of the physical activity side. This is not a trivial issue. We've talked about it bankrupting economies and shortchanging futures. It's urgent, and this is something that is manifesting itself in the futures of our kids today. And I think that everyone in this audience either has a daughter, a son, a cousin, you're a brother to someone. So this is something that we all have a vested interest in resolving, and Nike certainly wants to play a leadership role alongside many others to resolve, in particular, the physical inactivity crisis.
Thanks, Lisa. Awesome.
So I think we've heard a lot in Davos this year about increased social responsibility, the need to rebalance some of the inequalities in the world, and particularly how business needs to change its model to address a new, far more socially aware set of not only the workforce, but also consumers. And I really believe that this is something that together we can take action against.
Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, I think, given that you've heard a number of people say we have a crisis, I think we're moving way too slowly. And we really do need to speed up and accelerate action. And I think part of that means putting more pressure on those key players who can drive the agenda, whether that's government, private sector. Consumers need to step up. And I think we also need to move towards accountability frameworks where we can actually transparently see how different players are performing. Thanks.
Okay. Listen, I think this is about all we have time for. We've had a fantastic discussion here today. I think just to summarize, the thing that I took out of this the most is this multi-stakeholder thing and how this requires collective action. And so the thing I guess I'd like to leave everybody with is we're really lucky here. We're in Davos. This is part of the World Economic Forum. We're a very, very lucky group of people to have the opportunity to have this sort of discussion, have access to experts such as these. How do we make these messages available for the billions of people who aren't here, for those who may not, who may not have access to this information or may not have the choices that we have? How do we spread this message as far and wide as possible? So I just want to leave you with that. Thank you to all of you. Please join me in thanking the panel. I'll leave this to you if you want to do this.
Looks like we're serious here. The only thing that I would say is have fun with it, and maybe as you walk out, because we need to have fun with these things in order for it to sustain, maybe just do your favourite little jig as you walk out the room. And if everyone here on the panel, can you think about your favourite little dance, and we'll just,
make our way to the right here.